So in addition to playing Starcraft for almost your entire life, you've also been playing Warhammer for an extremely long time, right? And more recently, it seems like you've been playing it on a competitive level or broadcasting that part of your life?
Yeah, I'm just a really competitive person. Even kind of the origins, if you will, of my gaming life was Warcraft 2, GoldenEye, Mario Kart, which are all fun games you can play by yourself, but for me it was more about playing with other people. The
board game version that you play, or not really board game, but tabletop version, seems like a very different game from Starcraft in a lot of respects. It is ostensibly a much slower game than, I imagine your APMs are very low in Warhammer. Yeah. Do you find yourself satisfied in the same way that you do with Starcraft, or is it a different type of experience?
That's a great question. That's a great question, because it's, I feel like the communities and the people that are drawn to these two games are very similar in a lot of ways, because you're right, speed's very different. So in Starcraft, it can be kind of a physical game. A lot of people will come in and be like, I like Starcraft, but I don't play it because it's too hard. You know, you never hear that about Warhammer because it's, as you said, it's just, you have as much time as you want mostly. In competition, it's timed, but again, even that, it's not like being faster doesn't help you. But it does reward me in a very similar fashion in the sense that when I play Starcraft and I beat somebody, it's that competition. A lot of times you feel like you outplayed them, you outsmarted them, you outmaneuvered them. And the game allows you to, it's hard, you could never play the game perfectly, so it's varying degrees of how well you did. Warhammer is different in the sense that there's so much knowledge into it, so much measurements that, well, that's kind of a weird way to put it, but like everything's based on inches and movement and stuff like that, that the smarter person, the more intuitive person, the person looking ahead, that's the person that's going to win, generally speaking. So I get kind of the same reward from it. I feel very good.
Huh. And it's also a different vibe, I think, because you're, I mean, I know that in competitive StarCraft, you're usually in the same room with whoever you're playing against, at least on a tournament level. But there's something very personal and local about tabletop gaming that I think is maybe lost in video games sometimes.
Yeah.
I guess, I don't know, I'm curious to see how that affects the way you think about your opponents, since you're like locking eyes with them occasionally.
It's interesting because I've been to a lot of tournaments for Warhammer now, and you're right, it's a very different experience. When you play a StarCraft match against somebody, you're on stage, there's tens of thousands of people online, and then sometimes there's several thousand people in front of you, and it's akin to wrestling, you know, it's a fighting match. Like you are not necessarily friends with that person. Maybe you shake their hand at the end, or maybe you don't, but you want to beat them, you want to pulverize them. Warhammer, even in competition, because there's such a strong mixture of hobbyists but also competitors, I played against a guy who's like, he like threw in a pill and he's like, hey, you want a Vicodin before the match? And I'm like, no thanks, man, but for the rest of the game, he's on Planet 9 just because he's like, that's how he does it, I guess, and he probably had surgery coming up or something like that. But he was a very friendly guy, I don't know. Maybe it's just a Vicodin guy, I don't know. But he was having a lot of fun with it, he was relaxed. You know, like, the competition was still important, he wanted to win, but it was, we're not fighting for money, nothing like that. And you can still hit against the people that are super gung-ho and are tournament champions and are there to win. But it's much more social, and it has like an air of, we both love this hobby so much. It's interesting because you have to take that into account. The game, to field an army that looks good, either you spent hundreds of hours painting and assembling that army, or somebody else did that you paid a lot of money. But either way, you both paid a lot of money for that army anyway. So there's nobody, I always say this, there's nobody that half-assed Warhammer. You're not like, I don't know, I just spent $3,000. Like, nobody does that. You really, really like the game.
Do most competitive players paint their figures themselves, or?
Yeah, I would say most. And that's actually funny because there's like a, because it's, again, hobbyists and competitors, there's stigmas and stuff. I'm a terrible painter, and I have a very high I want things to look really good, and I love them when they do. So because I'm a shitty painter, I don't paint my models, which is like, you know, like in the car community, that'd be like, you didn't put together your engine block, you know, like something like that. So every time I'm at a tournament, they're like, gorgeous army, I'm like, thank you. Such and such painted it for me, and they're like, oh. Oh,
they like look down their nose a little bit?
Well, a lot do. It's not like not to paint the whole community in the wrong way, because it's not like that at all. Mostly it's tongue in cheek, yeah. Well, actually, I didn't even think of that. It was terrible. But there are some who are like immediately like, oh, okay, all right, you're good talking with you, and you're like, God, dang it, yeah.
It's funny. I feel like on a much lower level, as someone who occasionally goes to like competitive Magic events, I don't put my cards in sleeves, and I feel like I get weird looks all the time for that.
You'd be like a dirty 12-year-old heathen, I think.
Totally, but at the same time, like I think there's a fun component of local tabletop-related games of. It's fun when you sit down with a person too. The first thing I always do is just try to disarm them in some way and be like, look, we're gonna have a competitive experience here, but like I'm also a normal person and I know on some level you are too, and let's just like interact like human beings and joke and not like, because people, and maybe this is a Magic thing, I don't know if this happens to you, but occasionally like people get mad if your turns take too long.
Oh, absolutely.
One time a guy was convinced that he like, after I beat him, he was so upset that he counted my deck, and you're supposed to have 40 cards in a Magic deck, he counted 39 and stood up and freaked out and yelled like, Judge, he had one few cards too many in his deck. He loses, and everyone's looking around like, that's not actually how the rules work. And also it turns out I had 40.
You recounted, it was 40.
It was 40, like my card had gotten shuffled into his somehow, but like that type of competitive play where it seems like there's no joy left in it for the person seems antithetical to a good time. I don't know.
I agree with you, but what I think is so cool about these games, and Magic is very similar to Warhammer in that way, there's no filter, there's no barrier for who can play, so you will get that guy. You'll get that guy that's so strung out and nervous about this thing that he will, you know, stand up and like do this weird social thing where then you're like, do I stand up too? What do we do now that this man's making an ass of himself? But I mean, it happens in all games, and it happens in Warhammer as well, but what I like about it is that it's so social that that's literally a part of the game. Like when you walk up to the table and a guy like won't, you know, is like staring at you hard and won't shake your hand, you're like, okay, it's gonna be one of those games, I guess. So then it's up to you to interact with how you want to do it. Either you can reciprocate, or you can be the, like you said, the disarming, like, let's have fun, you know, I'm just here to have fun type of guy. And a lot of times, I feel like that's a really good balance to video gaming where, because it can be largely in part anonymous, or at least like through a screen, that part of gaming is lost a little bit, and you'll see that in like, I grew up playing CS 1.6, Counter-Strike, or, you know, I would do the Halo parties with friends, but then I would see friends play Call of Duty Online. I played Call of Duty Online too, and because you're not there with that person, there's something very different about people, and I think it's like the car in traffic syndrome. Like, with the windows rolled up in your little cube, you'll say anything.
Right.
But if you're next to the person, not so much.
Totally. There's such a difference between playing against someone's avatar and looking them in the eyes and like having it's almost a whole nother layer of hidden depth to the game of like how you interact with this person socially. Like tells are a part of Magic. People don't think about it, but they are. It is.
Absolutely.
It's a totally fascinating part of tabletop game, and it's why I kind of want to force myself to get into them a bit more.
Yeah, it's just. You know, going back to your question too, is like you were kind of asking, what does it offer in alignment with Starcraft, and it hits on a lot of things. It hits on the RTS aspect, the control, the feeling of competition. It feels like you're challenging your brain, so it's really cool. But I also like it because of what we just got talking about, like the social aspect. There's also that moment, you know, you talk about tells in Magic. When you pick up on someone's tell, you feel like the smartest person on the freaking planet. I play poker and I'm like, because I don't pretend to be, you know, an ESPN final table type guy who's like picking up tells right and left like they all do. Like it's like a weird magical unicorn that frolics into my peripheral, and I'm like, I think I understand what he's doing now. Same thing in Warhammer. Like when you execute a move that they didn't see coming and they like audibly gasp and like shake their head, you don't make like a scene of it, but you're like, well done, myself. Well done.
Totally.
You're doing good.